You're listening to Partnernomics Podcast, where we discuss the art and science of developing successful strategic partnerships. To learn more about the suite of Partnernomics solutions, visit partnernomics.com.
Well, today I am joined by Mr. Michael Vormittag from Mercedes-Benz. And Michael and I have, just really enjoyed having a conversation with Michael. Definitely some topics that we're both passionate about. One of those, obviously and definitely, is partnerships. But Michael is joining us from Germany, and Michael is the head of innovation and partnerships for marketing and sales for Mercedes-Benz. But Michael, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely, thank you. Happy to be here. Looking forward.
So, Michael, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to just have you set the stage for us and chat a little bit about your career, just kind of how you got started. It's always interesting to hear about how people start into their business career and then how they've traversed and then found themselves into a partnering role. Would you mind just quickly kind of just get us up to speed on your career and how you landed in the partnering seat?
Absolutely, yeah. For some reason, the partnering has been with me most of the time, actually. Right. So I studied industrial engineering and management, relatively broad, looking a bit at entrepreneurship, a bit at networks and partnering in that studies already. But then it finally led me to actually writing a thesis on innovation and collaboration, which was basically igniting that space for me, because I was like really sitting in back then in Switzerland, in Zurich, and trying to digest the topic, and I enjoyed it a lot, right? So I understood for myself, this is definitely something I want to look at, and then I continued basically in that, joining eventually Daimler or Mercedes-Benz at some point, with different stages in the more innovation space, and then at some point I took the opportunity to build basically a team which specifically looks at business development, partnerships, and how we can get innovative products in that space through collaboration, moving in the wider area of marketing and sales, which I'm currently now still heading, and very happy about it. Yeah.
So, Michael, has your entire career been in the automotive space so far?
So I have been before, like briefly looking to to fund an own startup, and I briefly also was working in a company which was kind of a venturing company for university technology. So I was, for example, looking into how to market particle accelerator shieldings.
That sounds exciting.
It's a bit different, but it was really fun because you got kind of a very different angle to now the automotive industry, right? So and then I joined Daimler afterwards.
Awesome. So Michael, you are in sales and marketing and partnerships. So talk to us a little bit about the different types of partnerships that you manage or that you find yourself in the middle of.
Yeah. So what I'm looking at generally is how can we bring valuable partnerships to our whole marketing and sales organization, right? And those partnerships for us are usually, and what I'm most interested in is the non-traditional partnerships for our organization, right? So, and for our organization, traditional partnerships would be, you have an agency which does stuff for you. You have a supplier as an automotive company which delivers parts and the likes. You maybe have dealers, right? And that these are traditional partnerships. Or you work with an IBM, with a Microsoft, Google, right? The big companies. This is for me not so interested because this is all very established. So I'm looking at the new things, the non-traditional things. So it's mainly startup companies, scale-up companies, or it's companies which are established, but we don't have existing classic relationship with, right? So for example, one thing I'm doing is I'm running a startup program based in Tel Aviv together with Coca-Cola and Warner Media and Walmart, right? So it's like all companies, and that's perfect for me because it's exciting. It's not traditional. So if I talk to Warner Media, it's very different if compared to talking to BMW, because we are not competing. I don't know, maybe in the future on some topics, who knows, right? But generally speaking, it's a very different different angle.
So Michael, What we call, it sounds like, what you're saying is those traditional relationships, those traditional partnerships is more of what we would call the commodity side of, it's the script has been built. We buy metal, we buy steel, we buy all of this stuff and we build cars, and that playbook is already written. But really what excites you and where you spend your time is working on that non-traditional, or really sounds like strategic partnerships, those things that are high innovation, high risk, but high potential reward, and trying to build those relationships and really see kind of what comes out of it and what's the opportunity to create that differentiation, create that additional value for your clients. Is that accurate?
To some extent, yes, but I would even layer it a bit more, because I'm looking at those strategic things you said, but not only that, because even in this non-traditional space, and I think that's something which is overlooked in many times in these functions, is there's a lot of opportunity and also small partnering opportunities, which are not strategic, right? So I don't know, you have someone who's building a website and there's this startup which has a very significant feature which can help that website to be more exciting, right? I wouldn't consider that as a strategic partnership, right? But it still requires us and, let's say, our business development work in order to make that small, tiny engagement fruitful, because the cultures are so different. It's not just a transaction, as you just mentioned before, because it's not established, right? So it's new. It's a startup which has never worked with a big OEM, big car company like ours. But on the other hand, it would generate benefits. So we are really looking at all from the very tiny beneficial for individual teams to, of course, also the larger strategic, more impactful conversations.
Okay. So Michael, just so I've kind of got my head wrapped around it. So like whenever I think about really innovative partnerships for, for an automobile manufacturer, I'm thinking of electric cars. I'm thinking of different technologies that goes into the car itself. I'm thinking about headlights that last forever and they're super, super bright, but they don't blind oncoming traffic. It sounds like you spend most of your time working on the sales and marketing side of pushing the brand out further, as opposed to technologies that's actually going to make their way into the car. Is that accurate?
That is absolutely accurate. Yeah. So we split kind of in the car business, and now in my case, the marketing sales business. But it's not, I think it's for us even more interesting in a way, because I'm not saying the other stuff is not interesting, right? but the one thing is you have a very clear goal, you have a very clear product, right? You have the car, you want to make it better, and you figure out a lot of things around it. And you even have a core competency in it, right? But we are now looking into a marketing and sales space, and partnering is, in my opinion, probably even more important in that space, because there are so many things which we as a car manufacturer are not, we're not doing it, or we should also not do it alone, right? So the partnership becomes much more interesting in a space where you have maybe less, core competencies. And so that's why I think it's pretty exciting to be in that space.
So Michael, you have a real passion for entrepreneurship, it sounds like, as well as innovation. And it sounds like you really enjoy working with these smaller companies and startups, these technology-driven companies, and looking at leveraging their capabilities, their knowledge, their assets in order to help Mercedes-Benz. Talk to us a little bit about what it's like and what you look for whenever you evaluate small companies that have technologies.
That's a good question. I mean, for me, there's lots of layers, right? So one layer is, of course, the product, right? So if I think anyone should do that, right? So how is the product fitting to your needs? And I think this is absolutely crucial to have a very clear understanding on the one hand, on our end, on the company end, what do we actually really need versus what does the startup really do, right? And there's the first translation work which my team has to do, is on the one hand really distill basically the real pain points and needs from the organization, which we see commitments, which we see drive, and which we see there's a future potential for it. And then understand in the outside world with, let's say, a startup or scale-up company, what do they really do? And is it, of course, they might say they do it, but we of course have to dig a bit deeper in really understanding, is there a match? And I think this is kind of the first and probably most important thing is really a true and honest match. If you have this, then you can basically check on a lot of things. But then, of course, you can't forget, and I think this is probably equally important, how is the current compatibility between what you search for and what the company provides, combined with the future compatibility for, let's say, a scaled implementation, right? So that's also something we very early look into. It's a great product. We have the need, but we see this just can't work because it can be personal, it can be structural, it can be cultural. And some things you can try to navigate around or to fix. Some things it's just not worth the effort, or you can't do it. And some things are, if you look in companies, and they are kind of the goal to reach eventually in a couple of months or years. If that is different than what our teams have, then it's also something we don't want to do, and we try to help both sides save themselves, because it's bad for the big corporate if they have an expectation which can't be met by the startup. But it's even worse, to be honest, if the startup has an expectation to grow to a certain level, and they need to grow to a certain level to fulfill investment goals or whatever, and the corporate can't because the plans are different. So that's maybe two of the major things. And of course, there's other items, but I think that's maybe two good takeaways.
Yeah, it's really an interesting part there, Michael, and it takes me back to my career, right? Whenever I was at Sprint, and we had conversations, I'd evaluated, gosh, it feels like hundreds of startups that had new technologies, had new content, had new games, had all of this stuff, right, that we were putting on our network. And one of the things that I personally had to find myself being really cognizant of is having the conversation with those companies and really getting them to lay out their vision, lay out their strategy. What are they doing? What do they see over the next 6, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years? And making sure that I don't show my cards too early, because sometimes it could be really attractive to just see that multi-billion-dollar company, that potential multi-million-dollar contract, and you can definitely influence, and you can pull that startup, who most of them are starved for growth, starved for cash, looking for money, looking for opportunities. And I always had to be really conscious and cognizant to make them give me their strategy first. I want to see the road they're on. And then I want to make an evaluation to see if we have intersection, if we have alignment. Has that been your experience as well, Michael?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think this is like one of the most crucial parts, I think, is this strategic alignment, because if you have diverging goals, then eventually you won't succeed. On the one hand, you need kind of to, as you just said, right, you need upfront to understand if the goals match. But I think you also have kind of, this is like a constant back and forth. And that's why the partnership role, to come back also to what we do, right? So the partnership role is so important as kind of an intermediary, which tries to be kind of neutral to understand what's our in my case, Mercedes, or our company's goals, strategies, and path forward, or the team we're working with, the partnership would be executed with. And at the same time, looking at that in the startup and having a constant monitoring, because I think in my experience, as soon as you see that strategies diverge, it's kind of bound to fail at some point, because the expectation is here from a startup maybe, or from the corporate, and the expectation from the other person is somewhere else. So I think really having someone in a partnership role is really getting that relationship to a true partnership where you have that knowledge about the strategic alignment is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, no question. Michael, I'm going to ask you, from your seat, I imagine there's a lot of these smaller companies that are looking to get into a sumo, looking to get into a big company. What kind of advice would you have for some of these founders, some of these guys and gals? What advice would you have? Kind of step one, how should they connect with, how do they kick off the conversation with a Michael at Mercedes-Benz to present their opportunity?
Yeah, please don't cold call me. So I mean, this is maybe a first or like 0.5 of the item. So that is actually something which is it's tough in a role like mine. I don't know if you also saw that it's now on LinkedIn or even on the phone. You get those cold calls from someone who is like semi prepared and wants just shoot and sell. And I like, no. And it really depends if I politely decline or if I not so politely decline or if I just ignore, but it's not gonna be successful, right? So I think the number one advice is in order to work with a company like ours, and especially with a role like a business development role in, to someone who is actually friendly towards external entities, right? So the biggest advice is don't just sell. Don't just sell something. Figure out what actually your counterpart needs, what's his state of mind, what's his research, understand what I probably want to, and don't try to sell me. Connect if you think we have honestly some value together. Important also here together, right? So I'm not if you tell me I sell you that and I will buy it because it's valuable, like for sure, I'm not so sure, right? So really try to see my needs, my pains, my role, and try to get in a discussion and figuring out what I might need, right? I think discussion has to be first, not sales pitch. Sales pitch is good for a salesperson to a buyer, but not if you're actually in the space of partnerships. I think that's the biggest misconception. And maybe on that side, like as a small side note, startups usually pitch, right? So here's the pitch, and usually they have one. At least how it feels to me. In 95% of the cases, they have one pitch which they throw at everyone, and this is also very unnecessary and unwise, because I mean every individual has different requirements and reasoning and business. So if I have an investor, of course I want to have a pitch for money, and they need to see the market cap, and they need to see, I don't know, in the matrix that the startup is in the top left and there's a hockey curve and whatever. Probably will also go through that. But if I'm looking on partnerships and how can I generate mutual value between my company and this company, then of course the conversation has to be entirely different, right? And I think that is something companies need to understand to be successful in really developing business.
And Michael, I love what you're saying there, and I couldn't agree more. I know that I think back to opportunities whenever we were looking at needing different solutions, looking to partner with companies, in particular smaller companies, and it starts with the relationship, and it starts with building the relationship. You have to put enough information on the table so that you get that sumo interested. You get them to where they can potentially see how your solution, that startup solution, that smaller company solution, how it might fit into the picture, fit into the mix. But really the smarter approach, I think, is to develop a relationship with that person from that sumo company, and they will basically coach you on what you need to pitch, how you could put your pitch together. So don't guess, don't sell, be prepared, do your research, but it's not transactional. To your point, it's not a sell, it's not a transaction. Especially in pieces like this, it truly is strategic. You're looking for something different. You're looking for that differentiation. And so it's a lot more complicated than just, putting your widgets, into our system, because if there was a widget that was already in the market, we would have already bought it and moved on.
Yeah, if it was that easy, exactly, right? So it's never I need your solution. We can discuss and figure out if we need your solution, and if we need your solution, we jointly have to figure out how to navigate the complex environment, basically, to come to something which is mutually beneficial, right? So I think that is definitely a key. And it's also I had a discussion with a professor from Georgia Tech 2 years ago, I think, but he had a really good example, and he said that it's very important to understand that you can, as a startup, have a 50 million business case working with Mercedes or with Amazon or with whatever company. And for you, it's super clear that why wouldn't they do it? Because we save you 15 million, right? But on my end, I have limited time and I might have a deal which saves 50 million next to it. So you need to understand my state of mind and where I am, because even saving 50 million is maybe something I'm not doing. Mostly I will try to do it, but you know, there is occasions where exactly this is not the case, because there's I mean, especially in a multinational company, you have so much time and there's so many opportunities. So you have to juggle what's kind of top of your mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. With some of these smaller companies, $1 million budget to them versus the Sumo, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. The scale is different.
Yeah.
You know, the conversations are different. So your point is very well taken there. So Michael, let's go kind of downstream a little bit, right? So we're having a conversation with this smaller company. We're interested in the technology that they have. What are some recommendations that you would have to these founders, you know, these folks from the smaller company, as to how they manage the relationship and the conversation and the communications? What are some of those success practices that they can follow?
So I think, I mean, we've been discussing this a bit already, and you said it. I think foundation for every relationship is trust. So you have to do, as a joint project team from the corporate side or whatever, like the company, the buying company, the selling company, if you want, right? They have to have a relationship, a real relationship, a partnership in a base, right? So that has to be trustful. It has to be mutual goals and vision, and you have to do everything to reach this. Because if it's, as you said, right, if it's only transactional, you are in a regular sales mode. This can be good or bad, but it's specifically good for transactional goods and not for more complex and strategic ones. So that would be my first advice. And then in that space, if you build that partnership, I think it's kind of related, but a bit aside of it is you really have to communicate constantly, very transparently, and have a very clear joint understanding of where you are. And then by doing this, also understanding the individual goals. You also have talked a bit about this. In that space, I think it might even make sense to think about a joint goal framework, right? So I think I had good experiences with the objectives and key results framework, OKRs, which also big companies like Google are using to steer their own organization. To kind of, why not setting up joint goals between the project teams and both sides of the project teams? Because eventually, if you really are partners, then you should convert to the same goals, right? So why not being transparent on really achieving also same goals, tracking yourself, understanding where you are, and then steering against it from point. And also in an, of course, iterative manner, as OKRs, for example, as a framework can help you with, right? And in this, and that's maybe the last advice. And we could give more advices on culture and on operation, but the last advice then I would say is here on, if you check your goals and communicate and have a good foundation on trust, then I think a constant checking in on strategic alignment is maybe something I would also give as an advice, because that's for me always the most sad thing. If everything goes theoretically good, but at some point you see that let's say the joint project is maybe not so much rooted anymore in a deeper corporate strategy. And this doesn't go out to the founders alone. This goes to the whole project team, right? So founders and corporate project partner, I think you have to constantly look is you're building exciting tech with an exciting company and it's amazing, but I think constantly like probing whether you still pay into the grand vision of the company and aligning it and positioning it and communicating it and taking your stakeholders to it is, I think, maybe one of the most important things for success.
Yeah, that task of alignment is not a one-time task,
yeah.
right?
No.
It's constant all the way through the relationship. So Michael's kind of referring to, I'm gonna just throw this out here, Michael, just so I know, I forgot to ask, but Michael's going through our foundations course, the Partnernomics Foundations course. Michael, how many lessons are you into? I'm trying to think how deep you are into the content of that first course.
So I think 3/4 through it, I think.
3/4 through it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's about 4 hours or so through it, it sounds like. Well, some of the things that you've been talking about is the partnership success pyramid, right? Trust, alignment,
it, yeah.
transparency, esprit de corps, which is commitment, and then to get the results. So that's some of the things that Michael's talking about. Michael, I want to have you talk to us about negotiating. So we have this smaller company. We're interested in forming a relationship with them. What kind of advice would you have for that smaller company as to how they should approach negotiating with a sumo?
It's an interesting question, because it also is, I think, from a partnership perspective. So how we tackle those things is our goal, and how I see my role. And I also would hope that lots of companies have some role like this, is let's try to figure out, let's not negotiate in a sense, but let's be open on what we need from that relationship, both sides, because we start small usually. And I always advise for startup companies and any kind of sumo, to speak your lingo, basically, to start small, to start with some sort of proof of concept, which actually has clear KPIs in the end, which you want to measure, right? So you want to achieve something and you check in if you achieve it. But let's say if that is your goal, be very transparent and just say, okay, so let's test this together and see if we can make this successful. And be very transparent in what you need. Be very clear on the startup side. So we give you now a favorable deal. So we don't want to make money on this. We want to test it, but also very clear. So we don't make money on this. So this price is not the price we will have later on, because we of course want to make money eventually. And then on the corporate side, also being very open on acknowledging this, communicating that inboundly, basically, and also putting in efforts to contribute to the project. Of course, the necessary monetarily assets, but also headcounts kind of in kicking off the project. So I would say the first step is actually not on negotiation, but it's actually on really figuring out if it works, but then being on the level that you can really do something which kind of evens, like, let's say, is a little risk play for both sides, right? So that you cover the costs eventually, be open on that, but then also be clear that then the negotiation afterwards happens. And I think then you are in actually the right spot to do any kind of negotiation, because what happens is you are in a trusted relationship. You've been very open, very honest to each other, both sides of the team. It's a great foundation for any negotiation. And then you prove that the product works, because you tested it, you build a small product, you build KPIs, you see, and then you can start actually, what is it worth? And then the negotiation will be very much more on eye level. It's clear the value proposition. The company, the corporate, the sumo can figure out what are they willing to pay for something like this. The startup, scale up, they can understand kind of what's the value, and then I think in the end you come to a much better and fairer deal, because both sides are on the same page.
Yeah, Mike, I love that approach. And we did that a lot of times, where you mentioned as like a pilot or a proof of concept that essentially gives you an opportunity to date before you get married. And so you can see, what is the technology? Let me see it, because there's so much, reputation and just so much on the line for the sumo that it's really risky to work with, smaller companies, younger companies, kind of pretty much unproven companies in a lot of cases. But that's a way to really prove it out. And I love that approach, that way to approach that. And what we talk about with negotiating is it should never be adversarial. So many times whenever we think about negotiating, it's in the dark room with the spotlights, going. It should never be like that. It should really be you and your partner against this market opportunity. It's you on the same side of the table, working with kind of, if you're negotiating against anything, it's negotiating against a market opportunity of how you're going to really seize that. So totally love that approach. Michael, as we wrap up here a little bit, I want to ask you, what is it about the partnering role that you really enjoy, or what is it that keeps you here? It sounds like you're really enjoying your role there at Mercedes.
Well, I think it's a lot of things. So on the one hand, I do like the interactive part, the social part on it, right? So I think it's it's a very different role than if you are sitting in like developing, figuring out something yourself. It's a very social and interactive play, which I do enjoy a lot, because with this, and I believe that very strongly, is right. So if you work with more, you can just achieve more also, right? So if you work alone, you're limited to whatever you alone, or your organization even, right? So I'm not necessarily talking about me alone, but say my team, right? So we can do stuff, but if we partner, we can do more. And on that side, I think that's actually where it's really, well, even getting me more is the impact you can generate, right? Because with strategic partnering, with figuring out the right strategic choices, you can multiple basically what you can achieve yourself. And I think that is the big plus on partnering, right? So you can just do more, you can achieve more strategic, more value. And yeah, that's what gets me.
Yeah.
What about you, actually?
Could not agree more. I absolutely could not agree more. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been fun chatting with you. Thanks for sharing your insights. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. We're going to get you into that second course.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Partnernomics Podcast is brought to you by Partnernomics. Learn how to leverage the power of partnership. To listen to more episodes of Partnernomics Podcast, visit partnernomics.com.